On the road, there are moments when everything seems to stand still, even when the truck keeps moving forward. The hours stretch on, the landscapes repeat themselves, and the sense of distance stops being measured in kilometers and becomes something much harder to define. For a truck driver, that does not happen occasionally. It can turn into entire days without a clear reference of beginning or end, while the journey continues far from any familiar point. Then a question arises that, seen from the outside, seems simple. Why can a truck driver spend entire weeks without returning home, even when apparently nothing prevents it? For someone observing from the outside, the situation seems simple. After hours behind the wheel, with part of the route already completed or even close to their place of origin, it seems logical to think that they could simply return home. It is an idea that fits with the way we understand any other job, where the end of the workday almost always implies returning to the starting point. But in long-distance transport, that logic begins to break down very quickly. The decision to return does not depend solely on the driver, nor on how long they have been away, nor even on the distance traveled. Because behind each journey, there is a structure that organizes every movement, every stop, and every kilometer with a specific purpose. Nothing happens by chance, and even less so the time that a truck driver spends away from home. What from the outside seems like a personal choice is actually conditioned by a series of factors that are not visible at first glance, but that completely determine the way life on the road works. And it is precisely there where one of the most widespread beliefs about this job begins to break down. The idea that a truck driver can return home whenever they want is not entirely correct, and it is not because it starts from a way of understanding work that, in this context, simply does not apply. In most professions, the day has a defined beginning and end. One goes to work, follows a schedule, and when it ends, the next step is to return home. Even in jobs with variable schedules, there is a certain degree of control over one's own time. That way of organizing work seems unquestionable because it works in almost all contexts. But it stops doing so when the job does not depend on a schedule but on a route. In long-distance transport, that logic loses its meaning from the very beginning, since a truck does not move according to fixed work days but according to routes that do not always have an immediate return point. The job does not consist of leaving and coming back, but of transporting a load from a point of origin to a destination that many times is located hundreds or even thousands of kilometers away, and when the job depends on completing that route, returning home stops being a decision and becomes a consequence, because in reality the driver is not managing their time. They are responding to a system that has already completely defined when they can stop, when they must continue, and above all, when they can return. In that context, the driver is part of the system but does not fully control it, and that is why they do not freely decide to deviate, stop, or return, because any change alters a chain that does not depend only on them. That chain connects each route with other transports, other schedules, and other loads so that the truck is not isolated but integrated into a continuous flow. For that reason, a trip is rarely a single journey but part of a sequence in which, after completing a delivery, the truck does not return to the point of origin but continues toward a new destination with another assigned load. The vehicle keeps moving because stopping it without a clear reason means losing time, efficiency, and work opportunities. Under those conditions, returning home stops being a simple decision. It is not just about turning the steering wheel and changing direction, but about interrupting a planned route, taking on empty miles, and altering the availability of the truck for future trips. It is a decision with operational consequences, not just personal ones. And if it is not the driver themselves who freely decides their route and everything responds to prior planning, then a question arises. Who really determines where the truck goes and how each route is organized? What from the outside seems like an individual decision is actually part of a much broader structure. Every truck in motion responds to prior planning that defines not only the destination but also the timing, the load, and the continuity of the journey. Nothing is decided on the fly, and even less so based on a single variable. That planning is carried out within transport companies, where specialized teams organize each journey, taking multiple variables into account. It is not just about moving a load from one point to another, rather it is about doing so in the shortest possible time, at the lowest cost, and ensuring that the truck is available for the next job without generating unnecessary idle time. To achieve this, factors such as the distance between origin and destination, delivery deadlines, the type of goods, and the location of the vehicle at any given moment are analyzed, which directly conditions the decisions made about each truck. Thus, when a vehicle finishes a trip in a specific city, it does not automatically return to its point of origin, but instead, in most cases, from that same location, it is assigned a new load and continues toward the next destination within the transport chain. This chaining of routes is one of the keys to the system, because the objective is not for the truck to return, but to keep moving, since that continuity allows for reducing idle time, optimizing available resources, and, above all, maintaining the profitability of each journey. Each trip generates revenue while the vehicle is in motion with a load, so linking one journey to the next not only improves operational efficiency but also sustains the economic balance of the company. However, that same balance is broken when empty miles appear. A truck traveling without a load is not making use of its productive capacity, so planning seeks to minimize those movements, linking routes in such a way that the vehicle spends as much time as possible transporting goods. Returning home in many cases implies precisely that, breaking the continuity of the system and temporarily stepping out of that logic of constant utilization. Moreover, each decision affects the next, so if a truck deviates from its planned route, it not only alters the current journey, but also the ones that follow, potentially losing a scheduled load, delaying deliveries, or ending up out of the optimal position for the next service. Everything is connected, and small changes can have a greater impact than it may seem at first glance. For that reason, the driver does not act in isolation, but within a network where each movement is coordinated with others. The route they follow responds to a global logic, not to an individual choice, and although they may have some margin in daily driving, the overall route is already defined within a system that prioritizes continuity and efficiency. In many cases, following that planning is also convenient for them, because it allows them to chain journeys, avoid idle time, and maintain greater stability in their work. As this functioning becomes clearer, it is evident that the truck does not move in order to return, but to remain within the flow of transport. The road is not a round trip, but a succession of interconnected destinations. However, this planning does not depend solely on distance or load. There is another factor that directly conditions each decision and can completely alter the development of a route. Because although the system is designed to optimize every kilometer, the driver is subject to a driving time limited by regulations that require breaks and rest periods, and this introduces a variable that changes the rules of the game. That time is neither flexible nor extendable, and when it runs out, continuity stops depending on what was planned and becomes marked by a restriction that cannot be avoided. The route may still be defined, but the movement stops nonetheless. Their working day is regulated by strict rules that establish how long they can drive and when they must stop. They are neither guidelines nor flexible, but mandatory, and they are designed to guarantee road safety. Throughout a workday, the driver has a limited number of driving hours. That time must be distributed with mandatory breaks that interrupt the rhythm of the journey. It is not a recommendation, but an imposition that the system itself controls. When the time runs out, the truck must stop, regardless of where it is or how much distance remains to be covered. This point completely changes the logic of transport, because the route may be perfectly designed, the load has a clear destination, and the system is prepared for the truck to continue without interruptions. But the driver's time introduces a condition that forces a stop, and that stop does not always occur in the most convenient place. It may happen in the middle of a journey, far from any known environment, in a service area, or at an intermediate point that has no relation to the final destination or to the driver's place of residence. The route adapts to the available time, not the other way around. This explains why the idea of returning home loses meaning in this context. Even if the truck driver wanted to return, the legal driving time may prevent it. They may be relatively close, but without available hours to drive. They may have some margin, but not enough to complete the return journey without violating the regulations. In both cases, the decision does not depend on their will, but on the limits that regulate their activity. Moreover, mandatory rest periods are neither brief nor anecdotal. They include breaks during the day and longer periods that force the driver to stop for several consecutive hours. This time does not depend solely on their judgment, but is recorded by a digital tachograph that monitors their activity at the wheel, establishing concrete driving and rest limits that cannot be exceeded without leaving a record. During that interval, the truck remains stationary and the driver must stay off the wheel. It is a total interruption of movement which conditions the continuity of the journey. Once the rest period is over, the workday restarts, but not from a chosen point, rather from where the truck was stopped. The driver resumes the route from that same place, following the initial plan as much as possible. There is no intermediate return or reorganization to facilitate going back home. The journey continues from the point where time forced the stop. This dynamic repeats day after day, driving, stopping, resting, and driving again. Each cycle is marked by legal limits and by the need to comply with them without exception. The road is not covered in a single stretch, but in segments conditioned by the available time. But these limits do not only affect the rhythm of the journey. They also condition the way the work is organized and the performance of each trip, because each mandatory stop each hour without movement and each decision marked by time introduces a cost that the system cannot ignore. That is where the logic changes, because when the truck stops moving out of obligation and not by choice, the impact is no longer only operational and begins to directly affect the calculation of each route, the assignment of loads, and ultimately, the economic sustainability of the entire process. At that point, planning stops focusing solely on the most direct route and begins to prioritize the one that best fits the driver's available time, so that the choice of route no longer responds only to distance, but to the real capacity to keep the truck moving without interruptions that compromise the continuity of the work. This also changes the way loads are assigned. A shipment is not allocated solely based on proximity or destination, but on the exact position of the truck at the moment it becomes available and on the time it can still remain in motion before stopping. The decision does not respond to a single criterion, but to a balance between location, time, and profitability. That balance is broken when empty miles appear. A truck traveling without a load is using resources without generating income. Fuel is consumed just the same, wear and tear continues, and the driver's time keeps advancing without economic compensation to offset that cost. For that reason, the system is designed to minimize these movements, linking routes in such a way that the vehicle spends most of its time transporting goods. This not only sustains the company's profitability, but also allows the driver to maintain greater continuity in their activity and avoid unproductive periods. This is where the idea of returning home comes into direct conflict with that logic, since in many cases going back implies covering a considerable distance without a load. It is a journey that does not generate income and that, moreover, disrupts the planning. Not only is money lost at that moment, but the availability of the truck for the next service is also affected. From that point on, a chain effect is created that can impact future jobs. At that point, time also plays a key role in this equation, because every hour counts within a system where a truck that is stopped does not generate income but continues to accumulate costs. Mandatory breaks, waiting times, and any interruption are part of the operation, but the system tries to ensure that everything else is optimized, so the more time the truck spends without producing, the lower the profitability of the journey will be. For that reason, transport companies organize routes with a very clear objective: to keep the vehicle moving for as long as possible within legal limits. Every decision seeks to make the most of the workday, chain loads, and avoid unnecessary journeys. The truck does not head where it is most convenient, but where it is most efficient. The driver is part of that dynamic. Their job is not only to drive, but to integrate into a system where every movement has an economic impact. Stopping at the wrong moment, deviating without planning, or interrupting a route can have consequences that go beyond the journey itself. Profitability depends on maintaining that balance between movement, time, and load. At this point, it is clear that not returning home is not a matter of preference. It is the result of a system that prioritizes efficiency and is designed to minimize any unnecessary loss. Every decision is made taking into account not only the present, but also what comes next. The truck does not move in isolation. It is part of a chain that requires continuity to function. In that context, the continuity of movement stops being only a condition of transport and also begins to define the way the driver lives. Because when the truck does not stop, neither does the routine that is built around it. And it is precisely there where a difficult question arises, since if everything is designed to keep moving forward, how does a driver adapt to spending entire days and weeks living within that routine? That adaptation does not occur immediately, nor does it respond to a specific decision, but is built progressively as the driver integrates into the dynamics of the road. What at first may be perceived as a break from ordinary life ends up being reorganized until it fits within a different logic, where time, space, and routine stop responding to external references and begin to be defined within the journey itself. In that process, the truck cabin stops being only a driving space and becomes a living space. It is the place where the driver rests, organizes their belongings, and spends a large part of their time off the road, with each element arranged to fulfill a specific function and make the stay more manageable for days or even weeks. In that context, sleeping inside the truck becomes one of the foundations of this routine, because the cabin is designed for it, with a rest area that allows the driver to fulfill their mandatory hours without leaving the vehicle. This detail is not minor, as it allows the continuity of the journey to be maintained without depending on external accommodations, which fits with the logic of constant movement that defines long-distance transport. The workday is organized around a repetitive cycle that adjusts to driving and rest times, in which periods of driving during the permitted hours alternate with stops when time requires it, mandatory breaks, rest, and the subsequent resumption of the route. This pattern is repeated day after day, and over time it ceases to be perceived as something exceptional and becomes a stable way of working. Within that dynamic, stopping places take on an essential role, since it is there where the cycle is interrupted and reorganized before continuing, with service areas, designated truck zones, or specific roadside spaces becoming regular reference points where basic tasks such as eating, resting, or preparing the next stage of the journey are carried out. They are not places chosen for personal comfort, but for their availability and their suitability to the needs of transport. As this routine becomes consolidated, the distance from home stops being measured in specific days. Time away becomes normalized, and the idea of spending weeks without returning stops being an exception and becomes an accepted part of the job. The perception of time changes, because the reference is no longer the traditional calendar, but the succession of journeys and rest periods. In this context, the truck takes on an even more important role. It is not only a work tool, it is also the environment where the driver spends a large part of their daily life. Keeping it in good condition, understanding its behavior, and adapting to its operation becomes part of a constant relationship that develops with experience. The driver learns to interpret noises, vibrations, and small changes that indicate the state of the vehicle. That connection does not arise by chance, but from the need to coexist with the machine for long periods. The truck stops being something external and becomes an extension of the work itself and, to a certain extent, of personal space. All of this builds a stable routine, predictable in its structure but demanding in its execution, since there is no improvisation in the way of living on the road. There is adaptation, learning, and an organization that allows this rhythm to be sustained over long periods without losing effectiveness. However, although this way of life becomes normalized over time, it does not cease to have an impact beyond the road. Because living weeks away is not only an operational matter, it is a reality that influences the way the driver manages their time, their relationships, and their personal life within a system that does not stop. This change is directly reflected in the personal sphere, where time at home stops being organized as in any other routine, rest periods are used differently, and relationships adjust to a rhythm that does not match that of most people. More than a choice in the traditional sense, it is a way of life that is shaped according to the demands of long-distance transport. With experience, the driver ends up developing a way of managing that distance, learning to anticipate when they will be able to stop for longer, when they will change several days of continuous work, and how to organize their personal resources within that margin in a dynamic where planning not only affects the route, but also the way they structure their own life and make decisions taking into account not only the present, but what will come next in the following stage of the journey. Over time, that experience becomes a fundamental tool. The driver develops the ability to anticipate situations, to interpret environmental conditions, and to make decisions that maintain the balance between efficiency and safety. They do not limit themselves to following a route. They understand how the system in which they are integrated works and act accordingly. In this way, that understanding completely changes the way the job is perceived, and the road stops being a transit space and becomes an environment where a large part of daily activity takes place. The truck, which was already a tool, also becomes a constant point of reference. The driver knows its behavior, its condition, and its needs, and adjusts their driving accordingly. From that continuous relationship with the vehicle, the idea of returning home whenever desired completely loses its original meaning, not because the driver does not want to do so, but because everything surrounding their work is designed so that movement does not stop, with route planning, driving times, costs, and an operational dynamic that together form a whole that conditions every decision. What from the outside may be interpreted as a personal choice is actually the result of a system that operates with its own rules. The driver is not avoiding returning. They are complying with a structure that requires continuity. Each journey, each stop, and each rest period are part of a process that cannot be interrupted without generating consequences. In the end, professional experience does not only consist of knowing how to drive, but in understanding how all those pieces fit together within the same system, because the truck driver does not merely cover kilometers. They interpret a complex structure, adapt to its demands, and make decisions within very defined limits. That is the difference between seeing the job from the outside and living it from the inside. When observing the whole, it becomes clear that spending weeks without returning home is neither a simple choice nor a habit without reason, but the direct consequence of an activity that requires continuity, organization, and constant adaptation. After going through this entire process, the answer stops being a simple curiosity and becomes a broader reality. Since a truck driver does not spend weeks away due to a momentary decision or a lack of alternatives, but because they are part of a dynamic designed not to stop, where every kilometer, every stop, and every decision respond to a logic that goes beyond the individual. Route planning, driving times, operating costs, and the very dynamics of transport create an environment in which returning home is not always feasible without breaking that balance. The truck does not move to return, it moves to continue, and within that movement the driver organizes their life and develops a way of working that, from the outside, is difficult to fully understand. Understanding this changes the perspective. It is no longer about asking why they do not return, but about understanding how the structure that keeps everything running works. Because behind every delivery, behind every product that reaches its destination, there are decisions, limits, and an organization that needs continuity to sustain itself. And it is there where the figure of the driver acquires its full value. They are not only the one who drives, but the one who interprets that system, who adapts to its rules, and ultimately who keeps an essential activity functioning that often goes unnoticed. If you have ever wondered why they can spend weeks without returning home, you now have the full context, and precisely for that reason, if there is anything in all of this that does not match what you imagined or that has made you see it differently, I read you in the comments. And if this content has helped you understand a reality that usually goes unnoticed, a like is not just support, it is what allows the algorithm to show it to more people and for this part of the system to stop remaining out of focus. Because while everything keeps moving forward without us stopping to think about it, there is something that never stops moving, and it is precisely there where everything makes sense, in that constant movement that sustains much more than it seems. They are the machines that move the world.